It may have rained on his parade, but for President Erdogan, this is his crowning achievement, the inauguration to start his third decade in power. But for critics, it's the inevitable coronation for an autocrat who made his defeat nearly impossible. After his victory, Erdogan said Turkey could now put aside its bitter election disputes and focus on national goals. The Turkish people and his allies abroad are all waiting to see what comes next.
I, as President, swear upon my honour and integrity before the great Turkish nation and history to safeguard the existence and independence of the state.
The most pressing concern is the economy. The Turkish lira has plunged in value and inflation is at 40%. Critics blame Erdogan's unorthodox policies, but will he change course? Reports suggest he'll reappoint his former finance minister, Mehmet Şimşek, a widely respected figure who turned things around after the 2008 financial crash. If that means Erdogan is willing to backtrack, it will be welcoming news abroad for his fellow NATO members, as well as those nations who want to join the alliance.
Every NATO ally has to make its own decision, and only Turkey can make Turkish decisions, and we fully respect that. So that's basically it.
Sweden is still waiting for Turkey to approve their NATO membership. Erdogan has said that Stockholm hasn't done enough to combat terrorism, something that played well with his base during the election. With NATO foreign ministers meeting this week to push ahead with expansion, the hope is that Erdogan will finally stop his opposition, with the Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg in Ankara today. Turkey itself is frustrated that the US won't sell it F-16 fighter jets, with American politicians saying Erdogan has to take a less belligerent stance towards NATO allies. And so there could be a deal to be done here, as noted by the US Secretary of State.
While we are not linking the two issues, and I say we, I mean the Biden administration, some members of Congress are. They are linking Sweden's accession to NATO to the moving forward on the F-16s.
NATO members know that despite their dislike at Erdogan maintaining dialogue with Vladimir Putin, that relationship ensured Russia's grain blockade in the Black Sea came to an end, and it could still be a route to a possible future peace deal in the Ukraine war. If NATO gets what it wants, it still comes at a price. It's framed the Ukraine war as a battle of democracy versus autocracy, and Erdogan doesn't fit their mould. The strongman has locked up the opposition and spoken out against what he calls deviant LGBTQ rights. He may offer his allies some concessions, but he won't always dance to their tune.
Well, let's talk now to Ziya Meral from the Royal United Services Institute think tank. Ziya Meral, given the narrow victory that Erdogan has just won, do you think he'll govern differently as he enters his third decade in power?
Most probably not. I think, but after 20 years in power, we have quite a good sense of his policies, the way he governs, or centralization of power that we witnessed in the country and how we envision this presidential system. There's definitely an anticipation that he might perhaps alter his economic policies, which hasn't been sustainable. And today, later, we will see his new appointment for the cabinet. But a lot of the foreign policy issues, I'm afraid, won't necessarily change because those are very complex. And another president couldn't also change some of them too.
I'll come back to those international issues in just a second. But if he does change tack on the economy, are we to expect more of the same in terms of his authoritarian stance? I mean, as Kieran noted, he was pretty uncompromising on LGBT rights, for example.
Yeah, I think some of that has to do with the fact that he was able to win this election at his weakest for the last 20 years in alliance with Turkish nationalists and a culture war polemic of defending for traditional Turkish values. Definitely, the elections were not fully free nor fair, and definitely there are concerns about freedom of expression and other political rights, but he did achieve 52% of the vote. So he sees that as a confirmation of his vision for the society and the new century of the Turkish Republic that just started. In other words, this is the second century of the Turkish Republic, and he has a vision. He's got 5 years to deliver that and might very well change the constitution to stay more. But it will be interesting to see how he can square that circle and achieve both economic development, importance in international affairs, at the same time keeping his own voters happy and keeping the opposition at bay, which clearly has demonstrated a bigger punch to him than ever before.
Right. Well, let's talk about international relations. Do you think he will be keen to improve relations with the West? And are we going to see any sort of concessions, for example, on letting Sweden into NATO?
So I think we have to accept the fact that as a regional medium power, Turkey sees itself in strategic independence language, right? It will engage with Russia, Iran, as well as with Europe, as well as with North America. It will do business deals with all of these actors and steer its own independent course, right? So for the last 12, 24 months or so, you have seen them even easing relations with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, which Turkey had fallen off much more severely than most of the European countries. So Erdogan is able to pursue that even with Israel. I mean, even you've seen the Armenian prime minister in Turkey today as well, too. So Turkey is actually able to do those easing exercises. But I think strategic divergences between US and Turkey, between some of the European nations and Turkey are clear. But on Ukraine, for example, Turkey has taken quite a pro-Ukrainian stand from day one, even though it didn't want to burn bridges with Russia. Turkey is about to deploy troops to Kosovo to beef up the NATO peacekeeping force as well there too.
Well, you talked about Russia there and bridges with Russia. This is the election outcome that Vladimir Putin wanted. So is that relationship going to change at all, or do you think it is going to be keeping Putin in the fold and relations there?
Yeah, but even the opposition candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu did signal positive relations with Russia as well as with NATO and the West too. So I think Turkey feels it needs to pull that balancing act. But in regards to the question of Sweden, I'm quite optimistic actually. We are almost there and it could very well happen before the July summit, because ultimately a stronger NATO is in Turkey's interest, because Russia is not an ally for Turkey. It has never been. It is a competitor and a direct risk for Turkish interest in Caucasus, Black Sea, Middle East as well. Turkey needs NATO and a stronger NATO.